Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the workshop meeting for Monday, January 26th. Please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, Madam Clerk.
Trustee Vogel?
Here.
Trustee Hein?
Here.
Trustee Brady?
Here.
Trustee Lang?
Here.
Trustee Vito?
Here.
Trustee Kruger? Present. President Argyris?
Here. Citizens' concerns and comments?
There are none, Mr. President.
There are no staff reports. Item 7.
Presentation regarding the Wheeling Town Center by Urban R2.
Thank you. Director Melanthropy and Mr. Friedman, why don't you come on up to the podium? Start off with you, John.
Thank you, President Argyris. This is an exciting time in Wheeling's history. The Wheeling Town Center project is the centerpiece of the village's downtown, adjacent to the municipal campus, Heritage Park, and the Wheeling Metro Station. This $100 million transit-oriented development project is a catalyst for additional development and redevelopment in Wheeling. Riva Development broke ground on Northgate Crossings apartment project in October and is also part of the downtown master plan. You know, building a downtown is a complex undertaking. I realize that this project has been discussed for many years, but the village entered into a redevelopment agreement with Urban R2 only 5 months ago in August of 2014. Brad Friedman with Urban R2 will articulate all the site planning steps that have been taken with all the stakeholders to bring this project to fruition. It's my pleasure to introduce Brad Friedman with Urban R2 to update the village board on the Wheeling Town Center project.
Good evening, Brad.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Melanthropy. I really appreciate all your support throughout this entire process. And it's good to see everybody again. We've talked about the Wheeling Town Center in lengths, and everybody is familiar with the vision. But I just want to recap real fast what it is that we are out to create. We've looked at a number of town centers, and we know what it takes to make a successful town center, to create a central gathering place for the community and integrate multiple uses, both of which the Wheeling Town Center will incorporate. Create a pedestrian-friendly environment, have a balance between public and private interests, plan for complex financing and various stages of the development, all of which the Wheeling Town Center incorporates. The Village Green, which is the focal point of the town center, is going to be fantastic. It is going to be an open space. It's going to be the focal point. We're going to have outdoor dining experience for all the restaurants that surround the Village Green. We're going to incorporate interactive water fountains. We'll have brick pavers to handle the heavy pedestrian foot traffic, along with some green lawn play areas for the kids. We'll have ornamental pots, planters, and trees. I'm going to fill the Village Green with a pergola, trellis, lighting, monumental sculptures. It is going to be a very pedestrian-friendly gathering space. And we'll also have built-in wood benches and some natural stone seating. One of the reasons why this project is going to be so successful is because it is a transit-oriented development. As everyone knows, it's adjacent to the train station. And ULI's annual Emerging Trends in Real Estate report ranks locations near transit a best bet for investors 5 years in a row. People want a room with a view. They want to live within walking distance of the coffee shops, the restaurants, yoga, dog park, film, and culture, all of which is incorporated into the Wheeling Town Center project. Lifestyles are changing. Convenience and affordability are paramount. By 2030, it is estimated that a quarter of all households are likely to live near transit-oriented projects where there is a high density of housing. Transit-oriented developments generate value for the public and the private sectors. They are sustainable, they're economical, they offer long-term benefits to communities, and they encourage revitalization because families are spending less on transit. Another reason why this project is going to be so successful is because of our anchor tenant, Flicks Brewhouse. You all met Matt Silvers and Alan Reagan, the CEO of Flicks. They came in to give a presentation and they provided a video, so everyone has a good understanding of what Flicks Brewhouse is all about. There was a shopping center conference in October of 2014. It was entitled Entertainment Fusion. The keynote speakers were national development groups and institutional investment companies. And they all said that in order to make a town center successful, you need to offer some sort of entertainment component. You need to maintain your edge and be engaging. They were quoted as saying, an innovative movie theater is a great centerpiece because it serves as a landmark and a central gathering spot that becomes a part of the fiber of the community. You need to create a cool space because people crave authenticity. Well, I gotta tell you something. Flicks Brewhouse is the coolest movie theater that you could possibly ask for. It is the only movie theater that offers the food and beverage service and brews their own beer on site. It is truly unique, one of a kind. They also say you should offer a wide range of dining options and create a terrace around the movie theater entrance. Again, the Wheeling Town Center does incorporate that with the Village Green and the restaurant spaces that surround it. All right, so let's talk about Flicks Brewhouse. They are committed to Wheeling, and I've already expressed how I feel about them, that they are a dynamic, unique cinema group. And I'm going to tell you one of the reasons why they're so successful. Most movie theaters have to give 75 to 80% of their ticket sales revenues to the studio production houses. So the only way that they can actually make a profit is on the concessions. So that's why they charge $10 for Coke, popcorn, and candy. And nobody wants to spend $10 because they feel like they're getting ripped off. Well, Flicks Brewhouse charges $4 for a beer, $12 for a burger. And that's what you spend no matter where you go. So people are happy to go in there and spend the money because they feel like they're having a good experience. Good food, great beer, fun movies, and Flicks also has very strong financials. They actually have a new cinema that they are opening in Des Moines. They have a grand opening party this Thursday, which I've been invited to, and I'm allowed to bring as many guests as I like. So if anyone wants to make the truck to Des Moines with me, please let me know. Maybe Ray can hook us up with one of his buddies at the flight to shorten the drive. But I'm very excited to see this new facility, to get up close and take a look at their industrial, edgy concept. As you could see, it's a cool place, and I am so excited to see this project get built so me and my family and my friends and my kids can experience it. All right, let's talk about financing. We've got tons of interest from a lot of financial groups for all the reasons that I mentioned: the transit-oriented development, the TIF district, the fact that we are part of a community campus. They all say to me, Brad, once you have your final PUD and once the land is entitled, come talk to me and we'll get you a term sheet. One of the reasons why we have so much interest is because of our financial partner in New York, the Goldstein family. Most of you have met Josh Goldstein. He came in a couple of months ago to give a presentation. The Goldstein family is involved in development, ownership, management, and operations of all different real estate classes. They have developed over 4,800 apartments nationally, 3,000 condominium units. They own and operate 500,000 square feet of Class A office space, 224,000 square feet of shopping centers, 2 hotels, plus they're currently building one down here, as you could see, in the British Virgin Islands of Anguilla. It's called Zemi Beach. So they have their total value of their projects to date is $1.3 billion, and they are totally committed to the Wheeling Town Center project. They have already spent $250,000 on this project. All right, so now let's talk about the Catalyst project. That's the project that I just finished up. Some of you have been down there and you've toured the building. We just had our grand opening in October. We're already at 75% occupancy. We surpassed our expectations by delivering superior quality finishes, and the tenants are very satisfied with the product. Now, we did run into some underground obstructions and we had some weather day allowances, but we were still able to complete construction within 19 months. Speaking of underground obstructions, yes, we did discover one on site in September. It was very disconcerting to my development team. It was not identified on any of the existing surveys, and we realized that we had to resolve this. We were already in the process of getting an updated survey based on direction from my civil engineer and IDOT. And I worked with them to ensure that the underground obstruction would be identified on this updated survey. Now, once we learned about this, I spoke with my design team and we came up with an alternative plan, Plan B. And we said, well, what if we just, leave Northgate Parkway as is, leave the existing Metra and just build on the Wicks property? Well, it was decided that everybody wants the Plan A, the project that's going to put Wheeling on the map and give us that legacy status. So the consensus was to enter into an agreement with West Shore, allow them to conduct their feasibility study so we could provide Wheeling with a town center that would have a lasting effect on the community. Preliminary results from the feasibility say that we should be allowed to relocate the underground obstruction along a drive aisle that would run adjacent with the tracks. So we're looking into that. We have some land ownership issues that we're working on with village staff, Canadian National, and Metra to clarify to ensure that we can relocate the gas main in that section. Once we discovered the underground obstruction, we had to look at Plan B, enter into the agreement, and wait for the feasibility study to get completed before we could start the preliminary PUD concept. So it did push us back a little bit in our project schedule. But during that time, we've had a lot of meetings. We've met with Metra, and they have agreed that peak retail and entertainment are practical uses for shared parking. And they are on board with the site plan, and they realize that there are plenty of open spaces. So long as we provide them with 286 parking spaces and 688 parking spaces, they are on board with the shared parking concept. They identified that most commuters have parked at the lot by 9:50 a.m., so they see no reason why we couldn't have reserved parking for commuters up until 12 o'clock or 2 o'clock, up to the village to decide. No need to distinguish between monthly or daily parking, and they asked for a drop-off zone for Pace Bus and Kiss and Ride commuters, which we have provided on the site plan. We also had an opportunity to meet with IDOT, and they informed us about their request for an updated traffic study, improvement plans, and geometry plans, all of which have been identified, and we have a topographic survey covering the additional outlying areas needed to move forward with that process. Additionally, we met with the Park District in October. We got comments from the Park District board and staff members on the overall site plan. We want to be good neighbors. We realize that we need to work with them. And more importantly, there's a cross-access agreement from a previous land swap years ago. And in order to make the modifications to this area up here, where the cross-access agreement lies, we need to make sure that we get approval from the Park District, and we are working with them, and as of now, they are on board with the site plan and in full support of the project. In addition to that, we also got comments from the fire department, and we met with Fire Chief Keith McIsaac in December. He had a number of comments that he provided to us on the site plan. We took all of his comments into consideration, and we revised the parking lanes, the drive aisles, made adjustments to some of the access points in order to accommodate those comments. We also had our civil engineer look at the turning radius for the fire trucks to make sure that everything would be satisfactory with the fire department. And we also made adjustments to our valet parking. There were some suggestions that we could not accommodate because when it comes to working with the retailers, a lot of times they dictate what it is that they want and how they want the site plan and their building to lay out. Starbucks has already provided us with their site plan provisions and their building requirements, so we weren't able to make adjustments to the site plan in order to keep our retail tenants happy in that regard. Speaking of retail tenants, we've got tons of interest from a lot of exciting restaurants and other retailers. In addition to all of the retailers who are already on board, we've got additional LOIs from BZ Bar and Grill. It's a unique bar and grill that's in Pittsburgh, across the street from PNC Park. interest from Blackfin Bar and Grill, Bluefish Sushi Bistro. Red Mango is still very interested in the project, along with Noodles and Company, Sport Clips, Firehouse Subs, and a number of other retail tenants. I have been continuing to work on the residential building design with my architects. We've made some adjustments to the courtyard, which now provides us with a greater amenity space right here. If you could see up here, this is where the village green would be, and this would be the main entrance for the residential building. And we're going to make it very open and inviting, and this is all going to be a common area amenity space that leads into the courtyard area. We've also looked at our floor plates for typical levels 2 through 5 with the unit mixes. Here you get an idea of the quality of the interior that we provide based on our Catalyst project. And this here is a rendering of a suburban project in Lyle, which is going to be somewhat similar to what we create, although our courtyard's actually going to be a lot greater than that one. All they have is a pool, but we're going to have a pool, we're going to have barbecue area, we're going to have a pergola, we're going to have cornhole, bocce ball, we're going to have a putting green, we're going to have a fire pit feature. It's really going to be fantastic and exciting. As a matter of fact, I think John Malanafi is already fielding phone calls from people who are asking if they can take up residency, which is pretty amazing considering that we haven't even broke ground yet. We've also been looking at the typical floor plan for the 1 and 2 bedroom units. And my architects have been drawing diligently to come up with some preliminary elevations. And as you can see, they put a lot of detail into the project to make sure that it doesn't look like one long building. We're going to break it up. We're going to introduce different colors and panels and make sure that the building has a lot of character to it. So with that, I am going to pass it back to you,
Thanks.
Dean, and open up the floor to questions.
Thanks, Brad. Let's start with Trustee Vogel. Any questions?
No, I really don't. It looks great. Just excited about it and can't wait till it gets started.
Thanks, me too.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Trustee Vito?
No, I echo that. I just, I'm looking forward to actually getting it going. It'd be nice.
Trustee Hein?
Thank you. What is going to be the timeline for getting this project underway? I know we got a couple things that we have to finish up, but I'd like to establish a timeline for.
Absolutely. So we're right here, and we are waiting for the feasibility study to be completed. Once the feasibility study is completed, then we will be able to submit the site plan and go through the preliminary PUD process, final PUD, close on our financing, and break ground by the end of the year.
All the questions I have, thank you.
Trustee Brady?
That was my question. Thank you.
Trustee Kruger?
Thank you. Brad, thanks for your presentation. It's outstanding. It gives us all kinds of things to be excited about. And there are quite a few moving parts. So I appreciate the due diligence that we're doing to get it started off right so that it stays right all the way through. So getting excited. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. I appreciate that.
Trustee Lang?
Just one question about the gas line. How long will that, is that on track to happen?
We haven't seen any results yet, so it's hard for me to answer that question until we get the feasibility report. We won't understand the cost implications and the timing implications, so we are anxiously awaiting that. The report is that their chief engineer is coming into town this week to finalize the report, and I believe John Malanafi had a conversation with West Shore, and we are expecting the results within a few weeks.
And other than that, I mean, the project is really exciting. It's, I'm looking forward to it happening. We've been waiting a long time, but let's make it happen.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Brad, thanks. Again, I would ask that staff and yourself to keep us informed within 30 days. I don't want to see you come back here in August with another presentation. I want to know what's going on, okay? We need to know what's going on. And again, continuing your talks with the Park District is very important to us. I know there's some commitments from the village with the Park District regarding the signalization to get the cross-access and everything else. We have a little bit of an issue with this, the pipeline that we talked about and stuff like that, which will get resolved. So continue to work with staff, but please, I want to hear again from you guys, from staff and you again within 30 days. I want a monthly update on what's going on. If it's nothing, I want to hear nothing. If it's something, I want to hear it. But I think this board needs to know where we're going and progressing with this thing, because we got to go to shovel in the ground, or we need to move on.
And we're going to present the board next week with an updated RDA that reflects the new timeline.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay,
absolutely.
thanks,
Thank you, Dean. Appreciate the opportunity.
Sure. Item 8.
Discussion regarding stormwater utility fee update.
Thank you. Manager Svendelis.
Thank you. One of the greatest problems we have in our community is flooding. A lot of what we have to deal with related to flooding is all based on our topography, our watershed, and overland flow of water. Flooding affects all of our residents and businesses in one form or another, directly or indirectly. Whether your street is covered with water or whether you get water into or onto your property, we're all affected by it because of the cost that flooding creates for the village's efforts in fighting those floods. Additionally, pollution plays into the problem of stormwater because it carries sediments, oils, grease, anti-icing chemicals, and the like into our watershed. And because of that, the government has gotten involved and created some unfunded mandates that make it very difficult for communities to mitigate stormwater in ways that prevent flooding and also create the environmental relief that the federal government and the state government requires of us. There's a high correlation between the area of impervious surface in a watershed and the adverse impacts on receiving waters. The more asphalt, the more pollution and the more flooding it becomes evident with the greater volume water that is discharged into the stream. For the last 14 months or so, we have contracted with CBEL to study the entire community as a whole, to look at exactly what happens in our community when it rains. And through that process, and you'll see some of it in detail tonight, there were 11 projects that were identified as being fairly serious, 11 projects that could deal in a real way with fighting flooding in our community. We are not tonight going to talk about all 11 projects because tonight what we are doing is presenting the follow-up to a discussion that we had about 14 months ago about what to do about flooding. It's a larger discussion really about creating a revenue source that will allow us to have the means to mitigate against some of the flooding in our community. And we talked about a stormwater utility fee. And what tonight, the results tonight that you're going to hear is what is that number? What are we talking about? And how did we get there? What is the formula to get there? In order to create that formula and in order to come down to a final suggestion, recommendation for this board, there had to be that 14-month process of studying what exactly is happening in our town so that we have the evidence to support creating a fee, and that's what you're going to hear about tonight. Before we get started, and I'll introduce Eric Gill, whom you all know, I would like to thank the committee of staff and Trustee Brady that worked through the process and sat through many long hours of hearing about projects in specific that allowed us to get to the conclusion that we are reaching tonight. Again, tonight's discussion, because you will hear about the projects in general, the reason for mentioning them tonight is so that you understand and so that the public understands what we're dealing with, but not specifically to go through each of the 11 projects. You will have that opportunity to do that once the revenue stream is created, once the process has been established for collecting the fee. Then we get down to, okay, what are the projects? What is the priority of this board to deal with those projects? And what is the timeline that we're talking about? So with all of that, I'd like to introduce Eric Gill, whom, again, most of you know, and express my appreciation to those that were involved in this process for the last 14 months of our lives.
Thank you, John. We had equal representation across the board. We had staff members from Public Works, Community Development, Engineering, Village Management, and as John alluded to, one of the trustees was also part of numerous meetings that we had along the way. This is an outline of the presentation that I'm going to go through today. John, like John said, we're not going to go through the 11 projects, so he asked me to keep it under 2 hours, so this is a short version of it. We're going to talk about the goals of the study, the problem areas that we looked at, how we went about evaluating those those problem areas. We're going to present some costs. Then we're also going to talk about a couple of other issues that aren't just flooding, but are stormwater aspects that the village deals with on an everyday basis, and that's the Buffalo Creek floodplain and the MPDS program. Then we're going to talk about how we went about classifying these projects. Obviously, if we're going to spend $1 to help 10 people, most people would say that that's let's do that project first versus a project that costs $10 to help one person. But they're all important projects. This was just a way of classifying it so that staff can then take it a step further. Then at the end, we're going to talk a little bit about the stormwater utility fee and how it relates to this study, and present an estimate of the stormwater utility fee for further discussion. So the goals of the stormwater master plan, like John said, the village has flooded a number of times. Really, the last big flood was in April 2013. That hit most of the Chicago area really, really bad. So what we're trying to do is identify projects that are going to reduce the flooding, and then tally up all these projects, tally up all the other stormwater issues that the village deals with, and provide a framework for due to this study to develop and establish a stormwater utility fee. This is an overall map of the village, and in yellow highlighted there are the 11 problem areas that we identified. What we did was, with the engineering department and the public works department, we went around the village based on historical flooding and identified areas that have not been both looked at and gotten some type of project in the past. So obviously, if there is a project that has been worked on or completed in the past, that was an area that we no longer looked at. There were other areas that needed to be looked at because they keep flooding. What we're going to do is, out of all these 11 areas, we're going to look at 2 of the areas and go through the process that we used to generally look at the 11 areas. As you can see, the 11 areas are kind of spread out evenly across the village. Even some of the big areas, what we end up doing is splitting it into 2 or 3 areas from a study perspective. So it wasn't just the 11, but it was more areas that we looked at within those 11. As far as the existing conditions, what characterizes those 11 areas, what establishes their need for looking at, we saw what kind of flooding problems they get, what kind of issues. Is it due to the fact that there's no storm sewers? Is it that they're in a depressional area? So we took all these facts and we did modeling of some of these areas. Some of these areas did not require modeling, and Mike Burke, who's here with me today, from Chris Burke Engineering. He did all the modeling for the study. So we're going to look at two areas. One is going to be the Dunhurst subdivision, and the other one is going to be the Richfield Ponds Echo Lake drainage system. This is a little bit of a blow-up of what we showed before in terms of the overall village map. We have, like I said, we took, this is one area, but then we split it into 4 areas. For example, here we have South Dunhurst, East Dunhurst, North Wheeling Road, and West Dunhurst. And what you'll see in blue and in dark blue is a representation of the flooding that generally occurs within those areas. The darker blue on the right-hand side of the slide, where it says North Wheeling Road, you'll see that darker blue, and actually kind of off the picture is Heritage Park. And then the railroad is that straight line there, just to give a little bit of perspective of where we are. Wheeling Road goes from the north of the slide and kind of cuts across. The darker blue areas, it's deeper flooding. The fact that that is so dark blue over there is really, there's a channel there, and that's why it's shown in blue. The yellow highlights that you see within the red circles, those are the homes that we identified as possibly getting flooding, whether it was seepage into the basement or some other form of flooding. This is a blow-up of one of the Dunhurst areas, Wayne Place and Bridget Place right there. Again, in the darker blue, that's Wheeling Road, and you can see that that's, if anybody that's lived here for at least a year and a half will know that Wheeling Road gets flooded and gets flooding pretty bad. It's a major route through it, so it represents a major drawback for the village in terms of the flooding that occurs there. So that's one of the severe areas that we looked at. But then again, if towards the middle of the slide, we have the residential highlighted structures there. Those structures also get flooded. The arrows that you see represent the direction of flow. So that's what we're dealing with. The flow generally here comes from the west, and it goes underneath the railroad tracks, and it enters into Heritage Park. So again, the dark blue is just the start of the natural channel that ends up into Heritage Park. So this represents an existing condition of this flooded area. What I'm going to show in this slide is a little video that it's one of the features of the modeling that we do, and it kind of shows what happens during the rain. And you'll see in blue, that's the flooding that occurs, and all that area got flooded. You know, we went with public works staff and engineering just to kind of verify that those are the areas that got flooded. We're not going to get every single road right, but in general, that's the area that gets flooded. And then eventually it drains out. So we didn't take it all the way. We didn't want to keep you all night here. So the next slide that we're looking at is the Echo Lake, the Richfield area. Echo Lake is to the north. The other area that we looked at drains from west to east into Heritage Park. This area drains from south to north. It goes towards Hintz Road. Hintz Road is towards the top of the slide. So the lay of the land is such that from the south, it goes north, it goes through Richfield, and it ends up in Echo Lake, and then it heads east into Buffalo Creek. Again, the blue areas show the level of ponding there. We're going to zoom in on this a little bit. This is the Sand Pebble parking lot to the south, and also the Polo Run Pond is a dark blue pond in the middle, and this depicts the existing flooding problems that occur. Most of this affects cars. It affects a number of parking spaces, 45 flooding parking spaces in the Sand Pebble parking lot, and then 22 on the bridge trail. So there's a number of cars that get affected with this parking condition. We're going to show another video. This is quick on this one. And again, this is the type of modeling that we developed to evaluate the flooding in these areas. It kind of shows when the flooding occurs, how high it occurs, and where the flow goes once the flooding occurs. So for proposed conditions, what we wanted to do was find a solution that reduced the level of flooding. Generally, when we look at these flooding problem areas, streets flood. If we were to develop a project that completely eliminated all street flooding, that you would never see even an inch of water on the road, then the cost would be too much. So one of the things we compromise to is we're going to let the streets flood as long as the roads are passable by cars. So that's one of the things that we allowed to occur under proposed conditions, because again, the cost to drain everything jumps exponentially, and not only that, but then where are we going to put it? And that becomes an issue. But what we want to do is definitely take away the flooding from around the residential areas, and in the case of Wheeling Road, from the depression area there that floods and blocks Wheeling Road. As far as the design storm, where it was possible, we did the 100-year. In other areas where it wasn't possible, we did the 10-year where it was more appropriate. So we'll, I don't know if we'll go into that level of detail, but like John said, in the next time we might discuss that a little bit in more detail. So we're going to look at the two areas where we presented the existing conditions. We're going to look at what we did for proposed conditions. So this is the East Dunhurst. Again, Wheeling Road is right here. And this is alternative 1A. And what we looked at is taking the flow that comes from the west and taking it across and dumping it over here, and then putting in an extra pipe underneath the railroad tracks so that the flow goes through here and ends up in Heritage Park. One of the things that would mitigate the additional increase in flow would be that the village has the ability to lower the normal water of Heritage Park in case there's prediction of X amount of rain. So they're not going to lower it every time it's going to rain, but if there's going to be 6 inches expected, that's when Heritage Lake can be lowered a certain amount to mitigate for any of the flows that could be increased as they get there. This is alternative 1B here. Before we go back, we're going in between homes with sizable culverts. That's not necessarily the most desirable solution. So we looked at possibly going through one lot, acquiring one lot, and putting in one culvert through there and making it all the way to Wheeling Road. On this alternative 1C, instead of using the culverts, we looked at doing it open channel, because anytime you have a culvert, it's generally going to be more expensive than using it above ground and conveying it above ground. So we also looked at that option. Then alternative 1D is say, okay, we've looked at that route, can we take it a different route? And we did take it to the south through Wayne Place, and then there's an existing storm pipe that comes along here, along the south, between that and the school. And again, it has to end up in the same place because ultimately it has to end up in Heritage Park. So we looked at that alternative. The costs have been flashing, as you can see. 6.2 million was 1A, 4.8 was 1B, 1.5, and 10.2. So 10.2, 1.5, 4.8, 6.2. I think, generally speaking, one would say, hey, this alternative 1C is significantly lower than the other ones, and that makes it very attractive. to implement.
Eric, can I interject for just a second?
Sure.
Just so that everyone is aware before they get nervous. The reason we're showing these is to show the board and the public the level of detail that went into this study. So before anyone gets nervous that their house is getting taken or that there's any other type of action that is being suggested, none of that, as you saw, there were 5 options. When it comes time to doing any of these projects, that's when we will talk to all of you about what your thoughts are on, do we pursue residential acquisition, do we not, so all of that comes later. This is just to show the level of detail and thought that went into each of these 11 projects. So before anyone gets nervous that the village is about to do anything, the village isn't doing anything, and we will go through the appropriate channels, which include, first and foremost, the board's authority to do any of that. So this is just an example to show how we got to the end result, which we're getting to.
Thank you, John. That's a very important point.
Eric, may I? Regarding Heritage Lake, too, just to remind everybody, too, there are other government agencies that would have to put the stamp of approval of dumping any additional waters into that lake, the Army Corps, MWRD as well. Correct. So it's not like the village is going to have this magic valve that we're going to turn on and turn off. It's all got to coincide with all the other government agencies.
That's correct. There's permitting involved and certainly coordination, and I'm sure Jan there woke up as soon as I said Heritage Park. So,
or the board that's sitting behind you.
So, in summary, for this particular flooded area, this is the condition of flooding under existing conditions, and this would be the condition of flooding under alternative 1C, I believe it was. So, as you can see, there's still blue in the streets, but that's where we want to keep the water. We want to keep the water in the streets. We can't take all that water and send it to Heritage Lake. There's just no room to do that without significant additional cost. Anything can be done if you have $1 billion. The next project area, the second one, and the only other one we're going to go over in detail just to give you a perspective of what we did during this study, is the Richfield Ponds. This is alternative 6 that we looked at. We showed you the existing conditions before, and this takes it to the 10-year level approach. Here we looked at 2 different designs. We looked at the 10-year, what if we did a 10-year storm event design and a 100-year storm event design. And here what we're doing, the highlighted in yellow, in this case we're lowering the normal water of the Polo Run Pond by 3 feet, and we are excavating this area right here that's kind of a depression right now. It's a little bit of a pond, but not much, and so we would providing 5.4 acre feet additional, or total? Additional, thank you, Mike. And then 2.2 acre feet here additional. So this 10-year event design is $2.6 million. In order to provide the 100-year, we had to make use of the Richfield ponds, and that kind of comes in handy because the Richfield ponds, as I'm sure the board knows, has been subject to a lot of stream bank erosion. And so this project, under this 100-year condition, this alternative 7, would propose to restore the banks of the pond for Richfield Pond, provide additional flood control within the ponds, and provide the 100-year level of protection for the flooded area down here in Polo Run and Sand Pebble Pond. So, but as you can see, the costs increase to $7 million compared to 2.6. So it's a jump, but the difference is that now we're not just taking care of the ponds down there, but we're also taking care of Richfield. So it's not necessarily an apples to apples comparison, because now we're helping more area by doing this alternative. So again, a depiction of the existing conditions, flooding area in blue, And in yellow are the parking spaces that are being flooded. And this is the proposed conditions, those 2 ponds, deep blue, they flood because they're detention ponds, so they should flood. So that takes care of 2 of the 11 areas that we looked at. There's a couple other aspects that I'd like to go over. One is the Buffalo Creek floodplain. These aren't necessarily flooding problem areas in the classical sense, but very important nonetheless. Here is an area of the village that depicts, it's a large area of the village that depicts the Buffalo Creek floodplain. And for now, ignore the yellow, what's under there in kind of blue-gray, that's the existing FEMA floodplain. And as you can see, there's a number of structures that are in the floodplain. There's 968 structures within the FEMA 100-year regulatory floodplain. As some of you may recall, back Chris Burke Engineering assisted the village in remapping the Buffalo Creek floodplain. The floodplain was even larger 10 years ago than it is now, and that process took a number of years. It was done in cooperation with IDNR. They did all the surveying for it, and the maps, I believe, became effective in 2007. So that was a long process, and it developed better maps. Then, a couple years later, the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District came along and did a study for Buffalo Creek and many other creeks in Cook County. What they did, the FEMA study is based on what's called the steady state model, which is simply what it does. It says, okay, you're going to compute the flow that goes through Buffalo Creek at a number of points. And from that model, you're going to take the highest flow and you're going to put it into another model and you're going to compute a floodplain associated with that. Well, that's a little conservative because you're taking the highest flow that occurs, but what's going to happen is that at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the flow going underneath the railroad tracks on the north is going to be, say, 500 cubic feet per second, which is a measure of the traditional measure of the flow. But then when it's going through Hintz Road, it's going to be 200. But what FEMA says, hey, once that 500 gets to Hintz Road, it's going to be not the 200, but it's going to be 700. So by doing that, and I'm already getting a little too winded on the explanation, but the bottom line is that it ends up being a conservative estimate of the floodplain. What MWRD did is they did the unsteady version of the modeling. And so what it does, it takes into account real time. So if whatever's happening that you see out there, that's what this model does. And in doing so, it doesn't have to take all the high flows that occur, that the assumption is that all those high flows occur at the same time. Well, we all know that's not true because it depends on how it rains and it kind of eventually makes it downstream. This unsteady version takes that into account. And as such, it's a little less conservative, or I should say it's a little bit more realistic. And in doing so, the depiction of the floodplain shown in yellow, as you can see, when you compare the yellow and the blue, it's a lot reduced in floodplain. So that's a significant difference. According to the GIS system that the village has, there are 308 structures within the floodplain. So that's a difference of 660 structures between the current FEMA floodplain and this unsteady modeling with MWRD. So what could happen is if the village decided to move forward and say, hey, look, we have this now updated modeling. It's kind of the next generation of modeling that FEMA is now accepting, and we have a narrower floodplain. Therefore, we can, if we were to go through this now, it will require additional survey, and we do, I make sure and highlight that it's possible up to 660. There are going to be a number of structures, because this is based on 2-foot topography that the village has, and FEMA's going to come back and say, hey, we want you to survey that and make sure that those homes are indeed outside the floodplain. So it's very likely that it's not going to be 660, but it's still going to be a high number. And all those structures are currently paying flood insurance right now. And if this were to move forward, and it's not a short process. Anybody that went through the first process with FEMA, there's public notices, you have to go through the state. So we're likely talking 2 years if we started today. But regardless, there's a number of structures that are paying flood insurance that under this new floodplain would not be required to pay flood insurance. So it's a savings that would occur directly to your residents. The other program that's not a flooding problem area, but it's certainly a stormwater program that the village has is the MPDS program. It's currently being implemented by the Public Works Department. The village is, what we did is we went in and evaluated what the village is doing, and we found that the village is not only compliant, but they're doing a very good job with the program. And we've described, we've kind of broken it down into 3 things. What IEPA requires, Illinois Environmental Protection Agency, which is the agency that oversees the MPDS program and mandates it to communities in Illinois with measures 1 through 6, is that the village is spending $221,000 currently, and now the rules are changing. I think everybody knows that IEPA comes in and changes the rules every now and then, and generally that means higher cost. And that's what's going to happen. The rules are changing this year, and so that's the main difference that you see between existing and proposed. What we did is we developed a cost that said, hey, these are new rules are coming into effect, and right now this is our best estimate as to what the village may end up spending to meet the compliance of the MPDS program. There's a one-time cost there. We left it in there. The village is actually in the making progress towards completing that. So it's possible that that one-time cost will be very much reduced or even go away by the time this fee is implemented. So, and then there's a third category that we put in here. It's general maintenance activities. Again, because the same department that takes care of the MPDS program and Public Works takes care of the maintenance activities. It includes Buffalo Creek, it includes the diversion channel, includes any silt removal, and right now, what the Public Works staff did is they tallied up what they spend generally in maintenance activities. They're separate from the MPDS minimum control measures, and that the number they came up with was $178,000. Now, as new projects get implemented, they're going to require maintenance. So the estimate of $300,000 was what was come up with in terms of what would fall under a general maintenance activity. So the total is from approximately $400,000 to $770,000. So again, it's a little bit of a big jump, but 2 main factors there is the rules for the MPDS program are changing as IEPA has changed the rules, and the fact is that as you implement more projects, you're going to require maintenance of those projects to keep them there.
Eric, could you tell people what NPDES stands for?
National Pollution
Discharge elimination.
Thank you. Discharge elimination.
Okay, thank you.
And can I add to that while we're on it? This is one of those things, we always talk about unfunded mandates, and I think when you add the requirement for, I mean, we're $773,000 of which we're required, maintenance that we're required to perform. When you add that to the flooding that occurs in town, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that was one of the reasons that you suggested that we pursue this program in really finding a solution to dealing with the costs and the flooding throughout our community, because it's unsustainable if we don't address it in some meaningful way. So is really a very important consideration in what we're talking about tonight in the stormwater utility fee. Sorry, thank you.
One of the other things that we did is we wanted to classify the projects. There are a number of projects that we identified, and obviously the village can't do all of them at one time. So we wanted to come up with some objective system of classifying it. We divided it into high, medium, and low. We'll go through each one of them. The high classification is an improvement project that the cost of the improvement did not exceed $100,000 per structure benefiting from the project, or reduce flooding along arterial roads, providing life and safety access route. Obviously, that's one of the categories that Wheeling Road falls under. Project located in the area of planned construction project. If there's a roadway reconstruction, such as Wolf Road, for example, we want to try to fit it in because that's coming very soon, and there'll be no point in doing it afterwards when the village can do it a lot more cost-effective now. So that fell under a high classification. Also, for both the high classification and the medium classification, the village wanted to give flexibility to a project in case there was an HOA, a homeowners association, that said, hey, look, we know our project is a little expensive, but you know what, we want to contribute a little bit, and maybe that contribution would jump that classification, 1 up or 2 up, whatever the case may be. So, because then the cost coming from the village would be a lot less. Medium, the difference here is that the cost of improvement per structure now was higher than $100,000, but less than $350,000. And then the low classification is a project that costs more than $350,000 per home, benefiting from the project. It also included stream bank stabilization project, though, although important, those projects are less of a nuisance than when people get flooded and their homes get flooded and their basement gets flooded. What we did is, out of the 11 areas, then we classified them. Here is a summary for the high classification projects. There are 5, 6 projects listed there that fell under the high classification project. The total, not including the MPDS program, there is the $473,000 per year, and that's a constant per year that the village is going to have to spend. So not including that, but the MPDS program did fall under a high classification project. The total is $3.6 million. And I'll jump quickly to the next slide that, that one has a much higher tally. So as you can see, these projects, and the next one is 3 projects, and we have 6 here. So we're doing 6 for $3.6 million, and we're doing less for a much higher cost. And then the low, it's a few more projects. It's a little bit more in terms of project cost. And some of these costs are going to be tweaked as the village finance department takes a look at them and makes a little more comments on some issues. But, overall, these are going to be the costs, and staff gets to look at this in a little bit more detail. And this is kind of an overall summary of all the projects. There were a couple of projects that were had a high cost per structure, and so we, at this point, we didn't recommend it. So they'll be in the report that, again, for now, I would consider that recommendation flexible in case, there's something that can be done that's less costly. So, what do we do with all these projects and all these costs? And what the village wanted to do is, as John alluded to earlier, was use this study as a framework to develop a stormwater utility fee. And the question is, well, how do you, what is the measure of stormwater utility fee? If I pay $1 and why is my neighbor paying 50 cents or vice versa? And so what's now, I would say, is a little bit of an industry standard is an ERU, it's equivalent residential unit. And this is a typical residential lot. There's the residential structure in the middle, the detached garage, the driveway, the sidewalk. And all those surfaces are impervious. And what that means is that it contributes runoff. Eventually, we all live in homes, and we know when rain falls in our home, that water ends up in a storm sewer, ends up in the street, and it goes somewhere, and it may or may not affect somebody else, but we all contribute, and that's the important thing. And so we all contribute in relationship to the amount of impervious area that we have. And again, this is just an example of a typical lot and how much impervious area it's calculated. And what the village has done and is in the process of finalizing, it's not finalizing yet, is taking the complete village and computed all these areas. So, so based on that, we have a cost, a monthly fee computed that would be classified as a stormwater utility fee. We've split this into the projects and MPDS. MPDS, even if the village didn't do a project for a couple of years, MPDS is a program that's already in place. It has to go on. It's a mandated program. So I just kind of wanted to show you that, again, as the village moves forward, while there's a little bit of choice on the other ones, there is no choice on NPDS one. So the ERU calculated was estimated based on completing all the projects in a 30-year time frame. And this utility fee does not account for inflation, so that would vary. Again, Michael, the finance director, will come up with some kind of estimate if the board desires of what inflationary aspects could be attached to this. We also looked at the neighboring municipalities for stormwater utility fee. There's a question on that. We have a summary up in the board. On the high end is Winnetka, but as far as Brawley Meadows is there, Downers Grove is there. They have a 972, and what we did is that each of these communities has a different way of implementing it. So in order to compare apples and apples, what Mike went through is just estimated what the equivalent would be on this parcel size that you have up there, 6,500 square foot parcel size and an impervious area of 3,300 square foot. So that's what each of these communities would represent. Don't go to these communities and say, hey, do you charge this much, because that is specific to this example. But if you gave them that example, that's the number that they would give back to you. Again, the Stormwater Committee, comprised of, I believe, 7 members, other than the consultants, looked at our study, reviewed our report, and based on everything, this is the initial recommendation for a stormwater utility fee based on an ERU charge. So this would be adjusted for inflation, whether it's on a yearly basis or however the village decides to do it. And part of this fee would, up to 25%, would be used towards maintenance. So if it's 25%, then 75% would be used towards projects. Proposed timeline, between now and August. In April, the final report would be completed and made available, probably posted up on the website. In May, the legislation based on the results of today's discussion and the final report would be drafted. And then August, the village staff completes the necessary water billing changes in order to create the charge. Any questions?
Thanks. John?
I'd just like to add a couple of things that probably are going to come up, and they relate to, okay, well, how do we go forward? The proposed timeline is on the screen, but a couple of things even listed on the previous slide. One of the things that we thought was important was creating a policy for the board, and you saw that as an asterisk underneath the $6, that dictates how much money can be spent towards maintenance. And that is our way of covering the NPDES charges on an annual basis, but also falls in line with the other financial policies that this board has set in place. That is really kind of a goalie. It is setting the marker so that it is dedicating 75% of all this money specifically to the projects, while at the same time addressing the ongoing maintenance costs that we have no other funding source for. So we thought that that was a good idea to build into our discussion tonight. The other thing is, well, how is this going to work? And that would be that the charge, the ERU charge, would show up on your water bill. We bill every other month. So your charge, a resident would have one ERU. Businesses would have whatever, based on their lot size, whatever their total calculations of ERUs would be. It would show up on their water bill. And that's going to take some time, which is why you see on the screen that it wouldn't be until August that this would actually go into effect. We have 8,000 water bills. Each bill would have to be manually adjusted because the system isn't set up to do flat fees. So we wouldn't have to do that every month, obviously, but in order to get this fee rolling, every bill would have to be affected by someone manually adjusting their bill. There are some residents in town that do not get water bills. They would start getting a bill, same form. Obviously, it wouldn't come with the water charge, but it would now just be the ERU charge based on their property. So that's the thought from staff as to how to deal with those few properties in town that do not receive a water bill. So I just wanted to address a couple of those things that dealt with next steps so that as you ask questions, you kind of knew where we were coming from.
Thank you. Trustee Brady, I'll start with you.
Thank you. Well, this has been a long time coming. You know, I don't know how many studies we've done through the years on Wheeling's flooding problem. We all know it flooded. Matter of fact, in 1967, when I bought my house, automatically the real estate says, well, you're going to need flood insurance. I said, why? Well, Wheeling floods. Well, certainly not where I live. Oh, yeah, all of Wheeling floods. I said, I live right behind the cemetery. You know, Boot Hills weren't called Boot Hills because people were buried there. They were called that because they were built on a hill. If my house floods, the entire village is going to be underwater. You know, but there's enough people that suffer through these floods, and the rest of us who pay the bills, even though we don't flood, that something has to be done. Through the years, I started in sometime in the 80s, we were doing studies, flooding. We knew all the areas that were flooded. That's where it went. There was never any solid recommendations to how it gets fixed. We didn't know how it gets fixed because we're dumping all this water in the river. And when the water gets high in the river, we've got no place to put it. So it just stays wherever. There's no place to put it. Now we have a plan. You know, we unfortunately, at this time, didn't have the resources to fund it. This program is there too. Everybody around here, most of the communities around here are doing it. I think it's a great idea. I think it's something that has to be done. And you know, when it comes to the savings, besides public works and everything else, every time it rains, and we forget, what was it, a year and a half, 2 years ago? I forget driving around, seeing people standing out in front of their houses crying because they got wiped out. You know, that's something that you don't want to see. But you see it more often than not around here from time to time. now we get an opportunity to correct this, to make it more livable, even though we certainly can't get rid of all the water, like Eric says, but we can make it livable. And for the 900 homes or whatever it is, what the count is now to pay flood insurance, my daughter was one of them. They're $1,100 a year, flood insurance. $1,100 a year. It's a lot of money times 900 of our residents. And if we can help 600 of them, what a feat that'd be. No, I think we're on the right track. We got to follow through. And I tell you, I have never been so impressed with Eric and Mike with their involvement in this thing. And you should see, what you're seeing now is the tip of the iceberg when it comes to data that they put together for this. It's immense. I can thank them and congratulate them for a tremendous job and how we can solve these problems. And I hope we can get it going. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Vito?
Just a couple questions. Directed at Manager Sfondilis, I understand this is kind of in, still in the workable stages here, but since 75% of the ERU is going towards the actual infrastructure and 25 is going towards maintenance, is there any consideration of a sunsetting of the 75% once the infrastructure's been built?
I think we can absolutely look at that as we start to scratch projects off of the list. This current list, based on the financial obligations to solve all these problems, goes 30 years out. So I think it may be a while, but to directly answer your question, yes, I think that we absolutely could look at that as we start to scratch projects off.
And a similar question, I admittedly got a little confused in some of all of the details of what was going on, but at some point, there was mention of maybe the HOAs contributing. I'm in one and I'm in Ridgefield, and I understand our HOA does a lot with our storm retention. If an HOA does contribute to some of the infrastructure, is there any consideration of reducing their ERU in proportion to whatever contribution they made through their HOA?
I don't think we would, just because the idea of the ERU is equity among everyone in town. Certainly if the board wanted to talk about that, we could. My personal recommendation would be that we don't do that, just to keep that equity intact. But I do think that the contribution you're talking about would definitely change and impact the prioritization of a project. So therefore, those people, whether it's Ridgefield or anywhere else, would see a much quicker return on their investment.
Okay. Thanks.
And I think they would welcome that partnership with the village. Trustee Kruger.
Thank you, Mr. President. Eric, thank you for your presentation. It was outstanding. I am not going to lie, I was a little lost in some of the numbers, but I get the gist. Perhaps more for John. We have talked about this, I know, and certainly living in an area where I don't get a water bill. So I know you're saying that you will send a bill that will just have the stormwater management fee on it, but I would hope that there would be some communication continued, and certainly before the first bill hits, that, you're explaining to people that don't pay a water bill why they're getting a bill for $12.
Yes, and honestly, we would expect that there's going to be some discussion about that because I assume that would be a connection to does that mean we're getting water main? Does that mean we're getting sanitary
Correct.
sewer? And that really has nothing to do with this, but you're right, those questions are going to come, and we need to get ahead of them before residents get out of misunderstanding, get up in arms over why they're getting a
Sure.
bill. So yes, absolutely, we would need to get ahead of that.
My second, maybe a comment more than a question is, I remember at the onset of talking about the stormwater management fee that perhaps because we are doing this really smart thing as a village and a community to deal with our stormwater problems, that by starting this fund, that we might be eligible for grants and other things that are offered that could help alleviate some of these costs and perhaps move medium rated projects into the high or something. But, we'll be looking at that as a village, correct? To watch for what federal money might be available to us, that we can say, hey, we're doing this, but it's not enough to cover what we need to pay for, so can you help us out?
Without a doubt, absolutely. And again, just so you know, when we talk about prioritization, the board can make that, will make that decision, whether it's high, medium, or low, based on the classification you saw tonight. That's just a guideline that is kind of the mathematical formula behind creating some kind of, can we blame Tony? No? Okay, good. Just to give some basis for showing how some projects have a greater impact for a lesser cost and vice versa. So the board can absolutely make those decisions when it comes time to prioritization, but we will spend everybody else's money at every opportunity we can.
Good, I'm so glad to hear that. And I get, you may not have an answer to this, Eric, but what are the new rules from the IEPA that caused such a significant increase? I mean, how much pollution is coming now that there was such a huge impact in the fee?
Well, one of the rules is going to be water sampling, and you're going to have to do water sampling a number of times a year, send it to a lab, and do those things. So that increases the cost. So that's one of the rules.
And our staff does all that water testing?
We have to have a lab come and do it, correct, Jeff?
Wow, okay. Well, thank you very much.
Trustee Lang.
Eric, my questions have to do with the $6 fee or so. Is that calculated on, you said lot size and impervious, is it an average, put it that?
It is.
That's my question. So there will be an average that most residents will, that's what you're going to do, is average that price out for most of the residents here?
Yes, I would say that most residential properties would fall, plus or minus a standard deviation of the number that the village ends up being with. But there are going to be commercial properties, especially any properties with big parking lots, they're going to pay more than that.
Okay, and have we, in your experience, have you saw any pushback from residents who say, my street doesn't flood, my house doesn't flood? I mean, it's kind of a sticker shock. Why should I pay that $6 a month now? Because I don't have any issues. And I'm just asking to what to expect in the future.
Yes, there has been initially, that's the reaction of the residents, but I think through education and explanation, they understand. They understand that everybody contributes water. The fact that somebody's at the low end and that's the person getting affected by the flooding is, a happenstance of just topography, but that doesn't mean that we don't all contribute. Certainly I've found that almost everybody understands that aspect. I mean, nobody likes to pay more, but I think they understand. They end up understanding it. So certainly the people that come to the meetings and any public outreach that the village might have at the end of those meetings, they will understand the concept.
And you showed quite a large list of communities across Illinois, it looked, that had the fees like this. Is that growing?
It is growing.
So it's something that most likely everyone will face if they have flooding issues in their community in the near future. This is the way to go to solve those issues.
Yes.
And potentially even just to cover the MPDES charges. Even if there is an active flooding in their towns are doing it just.
EDS charges.
Those darn.
It's a mandate.
Yeah, because it's an unfunded mandate.
Okay. Well, good. Thank you.
Trustee Hyde?
Thank you. In this area that we're speaking of, the homeowners associations that we'll be looking at, are those people with individual meters or are some of them with just one meter?
The condo associations.
It would be charged per unit. Is that your question?
Correct.
Per unit.
Per unit. Okay.
Am I misspeaking?
And
I think
most-
they were talking about that, and you guys were still trying to figure that out.
Yeah, I think
This
that's a
point,
detail, but it was.
It's not clear yet.
Yeah.
To answer your question.
Because a lot of times the homeowners association, the parking lots, which is the impervious area, is owned by the association. So the association would be responsible for that.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Vogel?
Yeah, just a couple quick questions. One, I too had quite a hard time understanding some of the numbers and following it. But if you talk about flooding in general, okay, and you talk about Levy 37 and what's being done on some of the Park District property off of Wolf Road and the money spent on that, how does that all tie into and affect what we're talking about here tonight?
You mean the projects that have already been completed?
Right. Were all those, I mean, did they have any effect? If those were not completed, would this cost be tremendously higher?
No,
No? It'd still
not
be the same?
tremendously higher.
Okay. Because I guess what I'm thinking of is people are going to ask, you know, we've spent money on Levy 37, we've spent money on this and that, and now you're asking for this fee on top of it. What did all that flood prevention do for us?
Yeah.
And how do you answer that?
Yeah, just Levy 37 was for Des Plaines. It doesn't mean that it didn't have good consequences for the village of Wheeling, but the floodplain that I showed you when I compared the FEMA floodplain and the new floodplain, I guess that's a good consequence too. I didn't separate the impact of Levy 37 versus using this more sophisticated modeling that FEMA does now, but, you know, in aggregate, there is some benefit that these projects have done. Certainly the William Rogers Diversion Channel, which was something that the village spearheaded through grants from other agencies, and that had a big impact in the floodplain from 10 years ago to what is there now. So that change has already occurred and is seen there. But a lot of what we looked at was more local drainage studies, more than anything, because I think the floodplain has been looked at by other agencies. The village has already done some of it. They've done stream bank stabilization, the William Rogers Diversion Channel, MWRD and Heritage Park and the Village of Wheeling have done, you know, the flood control project. So when you're talking floodplain, and we do have, I know I went through it quick, but for the Valley Stream Drive subdivision, that's something where we need a big project like that to help them out because of the floodplain impacts.
Okay. The other question is, once the infrastructure is in place, how long does it take before the residents end up benefiting by being removed from the floodplain? Is it a process that has to go through, a long-term process, short-term?
Long-term.
Long-term. So once that project's complete, it could be a year, 5 years before they...
The aspect I talked about with removing a number of structures from the floodplain is not actually related to a project. It's related to, like you said, Levy 37 has already been done. The stream bank stabilization phase 1 project that the village undertook with CMAP has been done. And when you take all that and you use this new tool that FEMA allows, excuse me, for floodplain, you have a much reduced floodplain. Now, there's a little bit of a kink on that because the state of Illinois, well, not just the state, but they require floodway, the definition, the depiction of a floodway inside the floodplain, and neither FEMA nor the state has come up with a way to establish the floodway based on this new model. So when that gets resolved, let's assume, to answer your question, that that's already been resolved, that tomorrow that's resolved. If the project if the board and the village administrator say, okay, we want to change the floodplain maps, we want to reduce it, Eric, like you showed us in that exhibit, give us a timeline. Well, it would take a number of months, for the technical aspects to be ironed out with the agencies, and then as that gets submitted to the state and to FEMA, that process alone is going to be over 2 years.
Okay, so there's not any immediate relief that anybody
No.
should be looking at. So
No.
if you're paying flood insurance today, a year from now, the infrastructure's in place, you're still going to be paying it for a few years. Okay. So people
Can I
are
give an
aware that
example of
it's-
that, Eric? You were part of that. In 2003, the village board at that time allocated dollars and hired Christopher Burke and his firm to do a flood mitigation program throughout the village. The maps were revised in 2007. To answer your question, when will the resident get a direct benefit from that? Once that map is revised and you're no longer in an A or AE zone and it's classified as an X zone, whatever the case may be, that's where you're going to get your break. Because then your lender will look at, say, you're out of the flood zone and not require you to have flood insurance because you have a mortgage.
But it takes several years
It took 4 years.
for that process.
Well,
after
the process of
infrastructure
doing
is
the
done.
study, plus the two agencies getting together, and it was about a 4-year process. But we got it done.
I just don't want people listening to this
Right.
to think that it's going to happen overnight.
Right.
Well, and just to keep in your back pocket, it's not IEPA the only people that change the rules. FEMA also changes the rules. But up until last year, if you change the maps and you demonstrated that whatever was in place was already in place a couple of years, you can ask for a refund for the flood insurance you paid last year. So.
1 year back.
1 year back. I wouldn't stop there, but I personally have not known of a case where it's been granted more than 1 year back. Now, again, FEMA's a program that is always looking for money, so that little loophole may or may not exist. I'm just kind of letting everybody know so that in the future that's there.
They're broke.
And if I could piggyback on that, look where we're at today. Look what's going on with the park today. Look at the land swaps today. Look at what's able to be built around this corridor here because of the efforts back in 2003 and 2004. This was unheard of to build anything here, let alone do any type of remodeling at the old village hall where the police department is now. I mean, those efforts opened up doors for economic development, for infrastructure for this community here, that without it, it would have never happened. It would have been the status quo. You can't. But if I recall, the net result of that change ended up taking the net result, about 145 to 155 residents out of the floodplain. Some went in, but more came out.
Remember that. Hey, thank you.
Thanks. Again, a couple things I just want to mention. Special thanks to Trustee Brady, Mark Janik, Tony Stavros, John Tack, Jeff Wolfgren, John Svandulis, your firm. This is something that it's been part of my life since I've been on the village board, and even more so now. There are numerous neighborhoods today that are suffering, that never had the vision, and as well as the village back in the day, that status quo was never always going to be good enough. Well, it's not. You talk about your subdivision. You talk about Arlington Club. You talk about anyone that has retention ponds and thought that the residents back then or the bill of goods developers sold them was going to be to fix all and there was never going to be a problem. Well, they never thought about development around them that would actually hurt the retention ponds or bank stabilization. We were fortunate enough, and just to get back to Trustee Kruger's comment, here's a revenue source that would enable us to put dollars away, not just to look at the current structure, the infrastructure that's in place that needs maintenance and dire need, our culverts and that are busted up that we've seen all over this community that we've never had the dollars or the resources to do, but also put a nest egg away for the opportunity for grants, whether it be with MWRD, IDNR, CMAP, or what have you. The Buffalo Creek Stabilization Program was a wonderful grant, but the local share was $800,000. And if you recall that we had to take dollars from the sewer fund or the general fund to meet that grant, and there's no thinking about it. You either going to do it, you have your local share, or the monies are going to go elsewhere. So we were able to do phase one, which was huge. And these were folks that were losing 13 feet of their backyard, garages hanging over the creek. That was enable us to do something neat. And now, again, with the economy and everything that happened in recession, some of these grant programs went to the backside. But there are agencies out there that understand the importance of local government to get involved with these major projects, and they've extended and put monies in budgets to help. MWRD is a good example of that. They're a $1.3 billion budget. They're the second largest budget outside of Cook County. Cook County's number one, they're number two. Now they've recognized the importance of that. We know the local government can't do it by themselves. We need to put some grant money in place with a local share contribution. Fees are no fun, but guess what? We all pay. We either do it this way, or we're going to pay with real estate taxes. We created, when Michael Monashane looked at a new revenue source, because we all sat up here one day and years ago, and we wanted uniform fencing. We wanted streets in the neighborhoods. We wanted parks. We wanted beautification projects, change the image. Well, where's the dollars going to come from? So to get back to your question again, are we going to educate the public? Well, that was an educational thing regarding the user tax. But the board, to this day, had made sure that those dollars were put aside in a separate fund to pay for projects like uniform fencing, lighting up our neighborhoods, doing improvements throughout the streets and stuff like that, that we've spent millions of dollars last year alone. Capital improvement budget was huge because we had the revenue source to do that. We need to do this. We are a village that floods. We are a village with aging infrastructure that costs millions and millions of dollars to replace. And the opportunity to be proactive has enabled us, with the philosophy that we've had on this board and the last few years, to change the classification with FEMA to save the homeowners, going from a class 7 to a class 6, from a 15% discount to a 20% discount. That was all because we were proactive and aggressive in doing what we're doing here. Not just the diversionary channel, the big projects. We need to look at the low, like you said, the inner projects. The big projects are great. Levy 37 is great. It's all wonderful. But it's the infrastructure within that we need dollars for to replace. Because in the long haul, we're all going to pay. I don't care if you flood or not. You pay. So I think this is a great program. I think it enables us to be prepared for possible grants down the road. I think it gives us the tools to help the HOAs out there and partner up with them. It's not a fix-all. It's not going to happen, like Trustee Vogel said, overnight. But it gives us a footprint to move forward and recognize the problems that we have here, model this community like the way it should be, as you saw with the illustrations that Mike and Eric did, which has been phenomenal, and possibly get a high number of properties outside of that flood program, which is the windfall for everyone. So again, I thank everybody for buying into this and working it out and looking forward to seeing some of the concrete numbers. I know there's a lot of maintenance stuff that Trustee Brady had brought up with me that staff is looking into and identifying and doing inventories on that would be an immediate fix that would give us the dollars to help do that. What we talked about, maintenance and paying for that with the fee. But I think we're on the right track and doing the right thing here, and we owe it to this community, and we owe it for future generations, because a deteriorating infrastructure is a huge loss for any community. And there's other communities around us that's costing them millions of dollars just to maintain without any new infrastructure in place. Trustee Brady, I know you had a comment.
What did that pipe replacement on Strong Avenue just get done costing us?
Yeah, right.
How much, you know?
Right. Big time.
Where do we get from it now? Where do we get it from now? General fund, where we got it, because there is no other.
Taking sewer, water, and prolonging other projects down the road that can be done now that we, Yeah. So I think we're on the right track. Again, Eric, I'm impressed with all the hard work you and staff have done.
Thank you.
And continue to work with you. And I like to see us move forward with this thing and waiting for that document in April and see what happens. John, go ahead.
Ray.
I'm sorry. Oh, Ray, I'm sorry.
Just one quick one. Is there any further talk about Buffalo Creek Reservoir expanding? Has that sort of died, or is it, is there anything that we know about that?
I've not heard anything. Can anyone else answer in more detail?
Lake County Stormwater Management, it's on their radar, I'll be honest with you. It's one of the projects that they're looking into right now and working with the other government and agencies to move forward to expand that. I think it's going to happen.
Okay, I know they talked about expanding and then they dropped it because there was too much pushback from the residents in that area.
To my understanding, it's been resurrected.
Great.
And they're moving forward to possibly expanding that.
And you're on one of those committees.
Well, I'm on the Lake County Stormwater
Great.
Commission.
I believe MWRD is taking the lead.
They are taking.
They have a consultant looking at that. But like you said, I mean, the reason Heritage Park got improved is because
They didn't want it.
they gave up.
Yeah.
So now the need is still there just because the Corps of Engineers, because they were the ones, because of Levy 37, responsible providing the mitigation, and that's what that's what the Heritage Park Flood Control Project is mitigation for Levy 37. They needed to move on. That doesn't mean that there are areas in Buffalo Grove and Wheeling that they still flood.
Yeah.
And so I agree that hopefully something will happen.
Well, it's all upstream. Look at, this project is not for Wheeling, it's for Des Plaines, like you said, in Mount Prospect and Prospect Heights. So we need help upstream ourselves.
But let's not lose sight. Look at the amenity we got because of it.
Oh, no doubt.
Which is wonderful, and
No
which you
doubt.
probably wouldn't have if you didn't do what they did. But I think a lot of things tie into the Buffalo Creek Reservoir as you speak, especially with the talks with the Route 53 that they're proposing and everything else. All the environmental stuff all tie into that, and all of a sudden, the Buffalo Creek Reservoir got resurrected again because they're getting closer and closer to doing Route 53. And the residents up and down that corridor have now agreed to a lot of things that were concerned with them, environmental stuff and the nature and everything else, that I see that project happening too in the next few years. So it all ties in. But anyway, Eric.
Thank you.
Thanks again. Thanks, everybody. Okay. Manager Sfondelis has an announcement.
It seems that the village got inundated with cold calls over the weekend from several companies that are trying to solicit residents to switch over their electric and somehow their gas service. I'm still not quite sure how that would work. But my point is that to remind the residents that we still have 2 years left on our electric aggregation commitments, and as far as anyone can project in the future, they have in the past and will continue to be the best bet in town. There is no reason, despite what any cold caller tells you, to switch over your electric service. Even President Argyris had a visitor show up at his door today, ringing his bell, telling him that the village, we can get a better deal than the village, not knowing whose house they were at.
And my gas, too.
And your gas, which again, not being deregulated, not quite sure how that would work. So it's just a reminder to the public that we do have 2 years left on our aggregation program, and to provide the phone number if anyone would like to register, or remind them to re-register their landlines if you would like to be taken off of the lists from these solicitors. That phone number is 1-888-382-1222. Again, 888-382-1222. Or you can register yourself at donotcall.gov. donotcall.gov. If you do call that number, you must do so from the landline that you would like to remove from the list. The link is linked to the caller ID from the phone from which you are calling. So please call from your home phone number or the number that you would like to have removed. We can put the link to donotcall.gov and the phone number on our webpage so that it's easily accessible.
Thank you. Trustee Kruger, anything?
Nothing today, thanks.
Thanks. Trustee Brady?
Well, just a follow-up, actually, this is Mary's due. It's snowed a little bit today. We've been lucky so far this year, but, we're still needing volunteers for Sherry Huzars, our Director of Senior Services, for volunteers to shovel people's snow that can't afford or physically can't do it. It's a critical situation. all we ask is that you take on a person or a household, and if they need somebody to show up and shovel, fine, you'd be available for them. It's a good program. I don't know, John or Sherry, could you give your numbers to a volunteer? Thank you.
And that link is on the, sorry, did I steal your thunder? That link is on the front page of our website right now. So if anyone would like more information, it is up.
Good.
Sherry, any?
If anyone is interested, please call 847-459-2670, and we'll send you out an application. Thanks.
Thanks, Sherry. Trustee Lang?
Just an airport update. There will be, save the date for February 18th and 19th. There will be at Hangar 9 an open house, basically on to answer questions to all residents on airport operations and noise and environmental issues and you name it. There's about I think there's 10 stations that will be in this presentation. The 18th, I believe, is going to be an afternoon session, and the 19th will be an evening session. I will get definite confirmation on all that before it happens. But it'll be a pretty good exercise for residents to come out and, they'll have pilots that will be there that will, why do some planes fly in quiet and others noisy? What are you doing different? And they'll be able to answer those questions. Pretty much anything goes. So that'll be happening 18th and 19th. As I get more information, I will definitely ask for it to be posted on our website and so on, and any other way we can get the message out. But we want every resident who has a concern of the airport to be out there, because this is a great time to answer their questions. And it's all part of the master plan, phase 1 of this master plan, and part of the process, getting community involved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I add to that?
Sure, go ahead.
Quickly. Not to surprise you in public, but just this morning I was able to confirm with Jamie Abbott that Charlie Priester will also be before all of you on February 23rd.
Correct.
February 23rd?
Correct.
Okay. Thanks. Trustee Vogel?
Nothing today, thank you.
Trustee Vito?
Nothing today, thanks.
Trustee Hein?
Nothing to see you then.
Clerk Simpson?
Nothing this evening, thank you.
Anything else?
I'm all talked out.
Is our village attorney here today? Oh, there he is.
Quiet over there, huh?
Interesting evening.
Yeah. Just a couple things to report back to the board. I met with representatives of District 21, and I'm happy to say last Tuesday we had a real nice meeting, and we are coordinating something with their staff along with our staff to have a little bit of a workshop, roundtable kind of a thing. Kind of get to know one another again and see what's going on with 21 and let them know what we're doing and stuff. So that's a meeting that will be announced very shortly. I got positive feedback from the individual I sat with and presented it to his president, and we're moving forward with that. So I think this is a good step starting the new year with another taxing body and building some bridges there and trying to do something. So I will report back to you once we get a couple dates set up for a meeting. That's all I have. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. We have no executive session this evening, so.
So
Motion.
moved.
Motion by whom? I'm sorry.
So moved.
Trustee Kruger,
Second.
second by Trustee Hein. Roll call.
Trustee Vogel?
Yes.
Trustee Hein?
Yes.
Trustee Brady?
Yes.
Trustee Lang?
Yes.
Trustee Vito?
Yes.
Trustee Kruger?
Yes.
President Juris?
Yes, thank you. Good night, everyone. See you next week.